My name is Alex Rourke, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had a pretty decent life. Decent house in the suburbs of Portland, decent job managing IT projects at a growing tech startup, and what I believed was a decent marriage to Vanessa, who worked in HR at a bigger firm downtown. The universe, as it turns out, had other plans for me, and apparently mistook me for its personal comedy relief. I should have seen the signs earlier. The late-night texts that made Vanessa smile in ways I hadn't seen in months. The sudden interest in weekend girls' trips to places that required expensive lingerie purchases. The way she started pronouncing my name like it tasted sour. "Alex, can you handle dinner tonight? I'm working late again," became her daily mantra. Working late, my rear end. I'm in IT, I know how to check phone records, and her late nights coincided perfectly with her location pings from trendy downtown bars. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me paint you the full picture of my spectacular downfall, because it's important you understand just how thoroughly I was played before I decided to play back. It started on a Tuesday morning in March. I was debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code when my phone buzzed with a text from Mason, my only real friend at work, and the kind of guy who notices everything but says nothing until it matters. "Dude, you need to see something. Meet me at Murphy's after work." Murphy's is this dive bar 3 blocks from our office, the kind of place where the beer is cheap and the conversations are cheaper. Mason was already 2 drinks in when I arrived, which told me whatever he had to show me wasn't good news. "Sit down first," he said, sliding his phone across the scarred wooden table, "and maybe order something strong." The photo on his screen hit me like a freight train loaded with irony. There was my wife, Vanessa, sitting on the lap of Reed Parker, my boss, at some upscale club I definitely couldn't afford on my salary. Her arms were wrapped around his neck, and they were looking at each other like they'd discovered the cure for loneliness. "When was this taken?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Last night. My cousin Beth was there with her friends. She sent it to me this morning with a message that basically said, 'Isn't this Alex's wife?'" I stared at the photo, zooming in on details I wished I couldn't see. Vanessa's wedding ring glinting in the club lights, Reed's hand resting possessively on her thigh, the way they were both laughing like they shared the world's funniest secret. "How long do you think this has been going on?" Mason asked. "Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Probably since Reed hired her firm to consult on our HR policies 3 months ago. The pieces were clicking together with painful clarity. She's been working late every Tuesday and Thursday since then. What are you going to do? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What do you do when you discover your wife is having an affair with your boss? In the movies, this is where the hero either breaks down crying or starts planning something violent. But I'm not a movie hero. I'm a 38-year-old IT project manager with a mortgage and a tendency to overthink everything. "I'm going to forward this to HR and the ethics board," I said, surprising myself with the decision. Reed's married too, and company policy is pretty clear about relationships between executives and consultants. Mason raised his eyebrows. "You sure you want to go nuclear right out of the gate?" "Mason, my wife is sleeping with my boss. Nuclear isn't strong enough." I went home that night with the photo burning a hole in my phone and a plan forming in my head. Vanessa was in the kitchen, making herself a salad and humming something I didn't recognize. She looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, I saw her the way I used to, beautiful, confident, the woman I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. "How was your day?" she asked, the same question she'd been asking for years. "Enlightening," I replied. "Yours?" "Oh, same old office drama. Jennifer's having issues with the Peterson account, and we had to stay late to sort it out." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly I almost admired the technique. Almost. "That's too bad. Maybe you should find a different way to handle the Peterson account. All those late nights can't be good for you. Something flickered in her eyes. Suspicion, maybe, or guilt. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just that you seem tired lately. She turned back to her salad, but I caught the tension in her shoulders. I'm fine, Alex. Just busy. I went upstairs to our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop. The email to HR took me 20 minutes to write, mostly because I kept deleting and rewriting it. How do you professionally explain that your boss is having an affair with your wife? How do you make it sound like a legitimate ethics complaint instead of the bitter rant of a betrayed husband? In the end, I kept it simple. Dear Ethics Board, I am writing to report a potential conflict of interest involving Reed Parker, VP of Operations, and Vanessa Rourke, HR consultant from Morrison & Associates. I have reason to believe they are engaged in a personal relationship that may be affecting business decisions and creating an inappropriate workplace dynamic. I have attached photographic evidence taken at a public venue. I believe this matter requires immediate investigation per company policy regarding executive relationships with external consultants. Sincerely, Alex Rourke, Senior IT Project Manager. I attached the photo and hit send before I could change my mind. Downstairs, I could hear Vanessa on the phone, her voice low and intimate. I can't wait to see you Thursday, she was saying. I've been thinking about you all day. My heart pounded as I crept to the top of the stairs to listen. No, he doesn't suspect anything. Alex is completely oblivious. He's so wrapped up in his computers, he barely notices I exist anymore. The words hit harder than the photo had. It wasn't just that she was cheating. It was the casual dismissal, the way she talked about me like I was furniture she'd grown tired of looking at. I know, baby. Just a few more months and I'll have everything sorted out. Then we can be together properly. I backed away from the stairs, my mind racing. A few more months until what? Until she left me? Until she figured out how to take half of everything I'd worked for? That night, lying in bed next to my cheating wife, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. If Vanessa wanted to play games, I'd show her what a real game looked like. But I'd play it my way. Smart, methodical, and completely above board. After all, I'm in IT. Information is what I do best. The response from HR came faster than I expected. By 10 a.m. the next morning, I had an email from Denise Hoffman, our head of human resources, requesting a meeting at 2 p.m. to discuss my complaint. The subject line was Confidential Ethics Investigation, which made my stomach clench with nervous excitement. At lunch, Mason cornered me in the break room. Dude, the rumor mill is going crazy. Someone said Reed got called into HR this morning and came out looking like he'd been hit by a truck. Really? I tried to sound casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. Yeah, and get this. Apparently Vanessa's firm got a call too. Jennifer from accounting heard Denise on the phone with Morrison & Associates, asking about their conflict of interest policies. I spent the afternoon in a state of controlled panic, watching the clock crawl toward 2 p.m. When the time came, I walked to the HR conference room on legs that felt like overcooked pasta. Denise was waiting for me with a legal pad covered in notes and an expression that could have frozen lava. She's one of those people who takes company policy as seriously as constitutional law, which made her either my greatest ally or my worst nightmare. Alex, thank you for coming in. I want to discuss the complaint you filed yesterday. Of course. First, I need to confirm that the photograph you provided is genuine and was taken without the subject's knowledge or consent. It was taken by a friend's cousin at a public venue. As far as I know, it's completely authentic. She made a note. And you believe this photograph represents evidence of an inappropriate relationship between Mr. Parker and your wife, who is employed by one of our consulting firms? I do. Have you spoken to your wife about this matter? The question caught me off guard. Not yet. I thought it was important to follow proper channels first. Denise nodded approvingly. That was the right decision. This is now an official investigation, and I need to ask you not to discuss it with anyone, including your wife, until we've completed our inquiry. How long will that take? Typically, these investigations take 2 to 3 weeks. We'll need to interview all parties involved and review any relevant communications or documentation. I left the meeting feeling like I'd lit a fuse without knowing how long it would take to reach the dynamite. The waiting was going to be torture, but at least the wheels were in motion. That evening, Vanessa seemed unusually chatty during dinner, asking about my day with the kind of forced enthusiasm that set my teeth on edge. "Anything interesting happen at work?" she asked, twirling pasta around her fork. "Not really. Same old project management headaches. How about you?" "Oh, the usual. Though we did get a strange call from one of our client companies today. Something about reviewing our conflict of interest policies." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. As if we don't know how to handle professional relationships. I nearly choked on my wine. That does sound strange. I'm sure it's nothing. Probably just some new compliance requirement. Over the next few days, I watched Reed carefully at work. He seemed jumpy, checking his phone constantly and snapping at people over minor issues. During our weekly team meeting, he could barely make eye contact with me, which told me everything I needed to know about how the investigation was going. Meanwhile, I started doing some investigation of my own. Not anything illegal. I'm not stupid enough to hack into anyone's accounts or violate privacy laws. But there's a surprising amount of information available if you know where to look, and you're patient enough to piece it together. Social media was a goldmine. Vanessa had been careful not to post anything obvious, but her location tags told a story. Every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 3 months, she'd been checking in at restaurants and bars within walking distance of Reed's downtown condo. Her friend Kira had been less careful, posting photos from their girls' nights that clearly showed it was just the two of them, and sometimes included background details that placed them at the same upscale hotel bar where Reed was known to hang out. I created a timeline, cross-referencing Vanessa's locations with Reed's social media activity and the company's consulting contract dates. The pattern was so clear it might as well have been highlighted in neon. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was grabbing coffee at the shop near our office when someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around to find Kira Martinez, one of Vanessa's closest friends, and the kind of woman who knows everyone's business but usually keeps it to herself. "Alex, what a coincidence. Can we talk for a minute?" She looked nervous, which was unusual for Kira. She's normally the type who could charm her way out of a tax audit. "Sure, what's up?" "It's about Vanessa and Reed." She glanced around the coffee shop like she was worried about being overheard. "I think you should know what's really going on." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "Can we go somewhere more private? This isn't something I want to discuss in public." We ended up in her car in the parking garage, where Kira proceeded to turn my understanding of the situation completely upside down. "Vanessa's been bragging about the affair for weeks," she said without preamble. "She thinks she's being clever, playing you and Reed against each other." "Playing us how?" "She's been telling Reed that you're abusive and that she's afraid to leave you. She's been telling you that she's working late, but what she's really doing is setting up her exit strategy." I felt like I was falling down a very deep hole. "Exit strategy?" "She's planning to divorce you, Alex. But first, she wants to get you fired so she can claim you're unstable and unemployable. She thinks it'll help her get a better settlement." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. That's why she seemed so interested in the HR investigation. Exactly. She thinks she can spin it to make you look like the jealous, unstable husband who's trying to sabotage her career. Kira pulled out her phone. "But I recorded her talking about it last night when she was intoxicated. I thought you should hear what she really thinks about you." She hit play, and Vanessa's voice filled the car, slightly slurred but perfectly clear. "Alex is such an idiot. He has no idea what's coming. Reed's going to promote me to a permanent position once we get rid of Alex, and then I can file for divorce from a position of strength. I'll claim he's been emotionally abusive and unstable, and with his employment history in question, I'll get the house, the savings, everything. There was more. Details about how she planned to manipulate the HR investigation, how she'd been documenting fake instances of my supposed erratic behavior, how she and Reed had been planning this for months. When the recording ended, I sat in stunned silence. "Why are you showing me this?" I finally asked. Kira's expression hardened. "Because I'm tired of watching her destroy people. She did the same thing to her first husband, and she'll do it to Reed once she gets what she wants from him. Vanessa only cares about Vanessa. What do you want me to do with this?" "Whatever you think is right, but Alex, be careful. Vanessa's more dangerous than you realize." I went home that night with Kira's recording burning in my phone like a digital time bomb. Vanessa was in the living room, watching television and drinking wine, looking for all the world like the innocent victim she was planning to portray herself as. "Hey, honey," she said without looking up. "How was your day?" "Educational," I replied, using the same word I'd used the night I saw the photo. "Yours?" "Fine. Though I heard through the grapevine that there's some kind of investigation happening at your company. Something about inappropriate relationships?" She looked up at me with perfectly manufactured concern. "You don't know anything about that, do you?" The audacity was breathtaking. She was sitting there, planning my destruction, and asking me about it with the sweet innocence of a concerned wife. "I might know something about it," I said carefully. "Well, I hope it doesn't affect your job. We can't afford for you to lose your position right now." Right now. Because in a few months, after her plan worked, it wouldn't matter if I was unemployed and unemployable. "Don't worry," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "I have a feeling everything's going to work out exactly the way it should." She smiled and turned back to the television, completely missing the promise in my words. I had her confession. I had the timeline. I had proof of the affair and evidence of her plan to destroy me. Now it was time to show Vanessa what a real strategy looked like. The beauty of working in IT is that you learn to think in systems, inputs, processes, outputs. Every problem has a logical solution if you can map the variables correctly. Vanessa thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to discover that I'd been playing chess all along. I just hadn't shown her my pieces yet. The first move came on Friday morning. I walked into Denise's office with a flash drive containing Kira's recording, a detailed timeline of Vanessa's activities, and a folder full of printed evidence that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. "Alex, I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon," Denise said, looking up from her computer. "I have some additional information about the Reed Parker situation. Information I think you'll want to hear before you complete your investigation." I played the recording first. Denise's expression went from professional interest to barely contained outrage as Vanessa's voice filled the room, casually discussing her plan to manipulate the investigation and destroy my career. "When was this recorded?" Denise asked when it finished. 3 nights ago. The person who recorded it is willing to testify to its authenticity if necessary." "And this timeline?" "Cross-referenced social media posts, location data, and company records. It shows a clear pattern of deception going back 3 months." Denise studied the documents for several minutes, making notes and occasionally shaking her head. Finally, she looked up at me with something that might have been respect. "Alex, I have to ask, why didn't you bring this to me initially?" "Because I wanted to follow proper channels and let the investigation proceed normally. But when I learned that Ms. Rourke was planning to manipulate the process, I felt obligated to provide complete information." "I see. And you obtained all of this legally? Everything here is either publicly available information or was provided voluntarily by a third party. No privacy violations, no unauthorized access to accounts or systems." She nodded approvingly. "I'll need to expand the investigation to include these new allegations. This changes everything." "I understand." "Alex, I want you to know that your job is not in jeopardy. Based on what I've seen here, you've conducted yourself professionally throughout this situation. I left her office feeling like I'd just won the first round of a very important game. But the real satisfaction came 2 hours later, when I watched through the conference room windows as security escorted Reed Parker out of the building with a cardboard box containing his personal belongings. Mason appeared at my cubicle within minutes of Reed's departure. Holy cow, dude, what just happened? Justice, I said, not looking up from my computer screen. Reed looked like someone had told him his lottery ticket was fake. That's probably pretty close to how he feels right now. By lunch, the entire office was buzzing with rumors. Reed had been terminated immediately for violating company policy regarding relationships with consultants. The consulting contract with Morrison and Associates had been suspended pending further investigation. And according to Jennifer from accounting, who had a friend in HR, there was talk of potential legal action if any company resources had been misused. I went home that evening feeling lighter than I had in months. Vanessa was in the kitchen again, but this time she wasn't humming. She was pacing back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I don't care what the policy says, this is clearly a setup," she was saying. "Someone is trying to sabotage us." She noticed me in the doorway and quickly ended the call. "Rough day?" I asked innocently. "You could say that. My firm lost a major client today due to some ridiculous ethics complaint." "That's terrible. What kind of complaint?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Someone accused one of the client's executives of having an inappropriate relationship with someone from our firm." "Wow. Was there any truth to it?" "Of course not. It's obviously just office politics and jealousy." I nodded sympathetically. "Well, I'm sure the truth will come out eventually." "It better. This kind of thing could ruin careers over nothing." Over the weekend, I implemented phase 2 of my plan. I created a detailed report documenting everything I'd discovered about Vanessa's affair and her plan to manipulate me. I included copies of all the evidence, transcripts of the recordings, and a timeline showing how she'd been systematically deceiving both me and Reed. Then I did something that would have made my old self proud. I had the entire package reviewed by a lawyer to make sure I wasn't crossing any legal lines. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in employment and family law, was impressed by the thoroughness of my documentation. "This is some of the most comprehensive evidence I've seen in a case like this," she said during our Monday morning meeting. "You've been very careful to stay within legal boundaries." I wanted to make sure I was doing everything correctly. "Smart. Based on what you've shown me, your wife's plan to claim you're abusive or unstable won't hold up under scrutiny. The evidence clearly shows premeditation and deception on her part." "What about the affair itself?" "In Oregon, adultery isn't grounds for divorce, but it can affect property division if marital assets were used to support the relationship. Do you have any evidence that your joint accounts were used for their activities?" I pulled out another folder. "Restaurant receipts, hotel charges, jewelry purchases, all from our joint credit card. I've highlighted the dates that correspond to their meetings." Patricia whistled softly. "Alex, you should consider a career change. You'd make an excellent private investigator." That afternoon, I got a call from Denise asking me to come to her office. When I arrived, I found her with 2 other people I didn't recognize, a man in an expensive suit and a woman with a legal pad. "Alex, this is David Morrison from Morrison and Associates, and this is their legal counsel, Ms. Rodriguez. They'd like to ask you some questions about the evidence you provided." David Morrison looked like a man who'd aged 5 years in the past week. His firm's reputation was on the line, and he knew it. "Mr. Rourke, we appreciate your cooperation with this investigation. I want you to know that Morrison and Associates takes these allegations very seriously." "I'm glad to hear that." "We've conducted our own internal investigation based on the information you provided. I'm afraid we've discovered that Ms. Rourke's conduct has been even more problematic than initially indicated." He slid a folder across the table. She's been billing hours for time spent with Mr. Parker that had nothing to do with legitimate consulting work. She's also been sharing confidential client information with him in violation of our non-disclosure agreements. The legal counsel leaned forward. Mr. Rourke, we want to assure you that Ms. Rourke's employment with our firm has been terminated, and we're considering pursuing legal action for breach of contract and misuse of company resources. I felt a surge of satisfaction so intense it was almost dizzying. I appreciate you letting me know. There's one more thing, David Morrison said. Ms. Rourke has been claiming that you've been harassing her and making threats. She's suggested that your complaint was motivated by domestic issues rather than legitimate concerns about professional conduct. I see. However, based on the evidence you've provided and our own investigation, we believe her claims are part of a pattern of deception designed to deflect responsibility for her own actions. That evening, I arrived home to find Vanessa sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and papers scattered everywhere. She looked up when I walked in, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. We need to talk, she said. I'm listening. I lost my job today. I'm sorry to hear that. No, you're not. You did this. You're the one who filed that complaint. I sat down across from her, feeling calmer than I had in months. Yes, I filed the complaint. Why? What did I ever do to you? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. Vanessa, you've been having an affair with my boss for 3 months. You've been planning to get me fired so you could divorce me and take everything I've worked for. You've been lying to me every single day. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, a kind of cold resignation. How long have you known? Long enough. What do you want? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You thought you could manipulate me, manipulate Reed, manipulate the system. You thought I was too stupid or too passive to fight back. And now? Now you know better. She stared at me for a long moment, then closed her laptop with a sharp snap. This isn't over, Alex. You're absolutely right, I said, standing up. It's not. The thing about cornering a manipulative person is that they don't surrender gracefully. They escalate. Vanessa proved this theory spectacularly over the next 2 weeks, launching a campaign that would have impressed a political operative. It started with the neighbors. Suddenly, Mrs. Henderson from next door was giving me concerned looks over the fence. Tom from across the street stopped waving when I got my mail. I discovered why when Mason mentioned that his wife had heard disturbing rumors about my marriage at her book club. What kind of rumors? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. The kind where you're supposedly emotionally abusive and Vanessa's afraid to leave you because you've threatened to ruin her career. I had to admire the strategy. Vanessa was poisoning the well, making sure that when our marriage inevitably ended, public opinion would be on her side. She was painting herself as the victim and me as the unstable husband who'd snapped when he discovered her friendship with Reed. But Vanessa made a crucial mistake. She underestimated how thoroughly I'd documented everything, and she overplayed her hand. The mistake came on a Thursday morning when I arrived at work to find an email from HR asking me to come in for another meeting. This time, Denise wasn't alone. She was accompanied by our company's legal counsel and a man I didn't recognize who introduced himself as an investigator from the State Employment Commission. Alex, we've received some additional allegations that we need to discuss with you, Denise said, her tone carefully neutral. What kind of allegations? The investigator consulted his notes. Ms. Rourke has filed a complaint claiming that you've been harassing her via phone and email, that you've been following her, and that you've made threats against her employment in retaliation for her ending your marriage. I felt my stomach drop. That's completely false. She's provided what appears to be evidence, Screenshots of threatening text messages, a log of harassing phone calls, and witness statements from people who claim you've been asking inappropriate questions about her activities. The legal counsel slid a folder across the table. She's also obtained a temporary restraining order against you, claiming she fears for her safety. I opened the folder and stared at documents that made my situation look very bad indeed. The text messages were particularly damning, angry, threatening, obsessive. They looked exactly like something an unstable husband might send to his cheating wife. Except I'd never sent them. "These are fake," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Can you prove that?" the investigator asked. "Actually, yes, I can." I pulled out my phone. Every text message I've sent in the past 6 months is backed up to the cloud with timestamps and metadata. I can also provide my phone records showing exactly when and to whom I've made calls. I opened my backup app and handed them the phone. You'll notice that none of these alleged threatening messages appear in my sent folder, and my call log shows no pattern of harassment. Denise frowned as she scrolled through my phone. "These timestamps don't match what Ms. Rourke provided." "That's because she fabricated them, probably using one of those fake text message generators online. They look real in screenshots, but they don't hold up to technical scrutiny." The investigator made notes. "What about the witnesses who claim you've been asking questions about her activities?" "I'd like to know who these witnesses are, because I haven't spoken to anyone about Vanessa except my lawyer and the people in this room." Over the next hour, we systematically dismantled Vanessa's fabricated evidence. The metadata on the fake text messages showed they'd been created using a web-based tool. The phone records proved I'd never made the harassing calls she claimed. The witness statements came from people who, when contacted directly, either denied making them or admitted they'd been misled about what they were signing. "Mr. Rourke," the legal counsel said finally, "it appears that Ms. Rourke has filed false accusations against you. That's a serious matter. What happens now?" "We'll be dismissing the complaint and referring this matter to the appropriate authorities. Filing false harassment claims is a misdemeanor, and attempting to manipulate a workplace investigation could result in civil liability." I left the meeting feeling like I'd dodged a bullet, but also knowing that Vanessa had just crossed a line that changed everything. She wasn't content to just cheat and lie. She was actively trying to destroy my life with false accusations. The gloves, as they say, were officially off. That evening, I drove to Reed's house in the upscale subdivision where he'd been hiding since his termination. His Porsche was in the driveway, looking as pristine and arrogant as its owner. I parked across the street and waited. Reed emerged 20 minutes later, probably heading to one of his usual haunts. He looked haggard, unshaven, the dark stubble roughening his jaw like sandpaper, his shirt creased and half-tucked, the tie hanging loose around his neck. His whole posture radiated exhaustion, the kind that comes not just from lack of sleep, but from the slow collapse of something carefully built over years. He had the air of a man who'd been running damage control on a life that had imploded in spectacular fashion, and was now just trudging through the wreckage, too tired to pretend anymore. I followed him at a distance, watching the slow drag of his feet against the pavement, the way he checked over his shoulder like he expected ghosts to be following. He eventually drifted toward a bar downtown, the same trendy, overpriced place where he and Vanessa had once been photographed, all smiles and champagne. Tonight, there was no glamour, no laughter. He walked in like a man walking into a confession booth. Inside, the lighting was dim, amber spilling across polished wood and the low hum of a jazz playlist mixing with soft chatter. Reed took a seat at the bar, alone, hunched over a glass of what looked like whiskey, swirling it without drinking. His phone sat in front of him, screen lighting his face as he stared at it like it held the secrets of the universe, or maybe the last remnants of his sanity. For a while, I just watched, feeling the familiar knot of anger twist somewhere beneath my ribs. Then I walked up and sat down next to him. "Hello, Reed." He looked up sharply, startled at first, eyes wide and unfocused. Then the recognition hit, and his expression hardened like wet cement. "What do you want, Alex?" "Just to talk." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I don't think that's a good idea." "I think it's a great idea," I said, keeping my tone level. "See, I know about Vanessa's little plan to get me fired. I know about the fake harassment complaint. I know about all of it." For a moment, the color drained from his face. His fingers tightened around the glass, and I could see the faint tremor in his hand. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, though his voice betrayed him. "Sure you do," I replied quietly. "The question is, how much of it was your idea?" He looked away, taking a long, deliberate sip of whiskey before answering. "Look, Alex, things got complicated. I never meant for it to go this far. But you were happy to go along with it when you thought it would work. Vanessa said you were abusive," he murmured. "She said she was afraid of you." "And you believe that?" He stared down at the bar. "I wanted to believe it," he said finally. "It made it easier to justify what we were doing." I gestured to the bartender for a drink, never breaking eye contact. When the glass slid my way, I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch. "Here's what's going to happen, Reed. You're going to call Vanessa tonight and tell her you're done. No more scheming, no more plans, no more relationship. You're going to disappear from her life completely." He exhaled through his nose, a short, bitter sound. "And if I don't?" I leaned a little closer, my voice calm, almost casual. "Then I'll make sure your wife finds out about every detail of your affair. I'll make sure your kids know exactly what kind of man their father is. And I'll make sure every potential employer in this city knows that you were terminated for violating ethics policies and attempting to manipulate investigations." Reed stared into his drink for a long time. The ice had melted, but he kept turning the glass as if searching for answers in its amber depths. "She'll destroy me if I abandon her now," he said at last, voice low and broken. "You don't know what she's capable of." "I'm learning," I said. "But here's the thing. She's going to destroy you anyway. That's what she does. Ask her first husband if you don't believe me." I finished my drink, the burn of it steadying me, and pushed the glass away. "You have until tomorrow night to make the call. After that, I start making mine." I turned and started toward the door. Behind me, I heard him call out, his voice cracking just slightly. "Alex, wait!" I stopped and glanced back. "For what it's worth," he said, eyes tired and wet. "I'm sorry. About all of it." I looked at him for a long moment. "No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference." The next morning, I implemented the next phase of my plan. I created social media accounts on every major platform and began systematically documenting Vanessa's lies. Not in an angry, ranting way that would make me look unstable, but with the methodical precision of someone presenting evidence. I posted the timeline showing her deception. I posted screenshots of the fake harassment complaint alongside proof of its fabrication. I posted the recording of her admitting to her manipulation plan with a clear explanation of how and why it was obtained. Within hours, the posts were being shared by friends, co-workers, and people I barely knew. The narrative Vanessa had been trying to construct, the innocent victim and the unstable husband, crumbled under the weight of documented evidence. My phone started ringing around noon. The first call was from Vanessa. "What have you done?" she screamed before I could even say hello. "I've told the truth. Novel concept, I know. You're destroying my reputation. I'm correcting the lies you've been spreading about mine. Take those posts down right now or I'll sue you for defamation." "Go ahead. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. Everything I posted is documented and verifiable." She hung up without another word. The second call came an hour later from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Rourke, this is Janet Parker, Reed's wife. I think we should talk." We met at a coffee shop near my office. Janet Parker was a petite woman in her 40s with the kind of quiet strength that comes from years of dealing with difficult situations. She looked tired, but determined. "I want to thank you for opening my eyes," she said without preamble. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." "I'm not. I suspected something was wrong, but Reed kept gaslighting me, making me think I was paranoid and jealous. When I saw your posts, everything clicked into place." She pulled out her phone. "I've been doing some investigating of my own. Did you know that Reed used our joint credit card to pay for hotel rooms? Or that he's been lying about his whereabouts for months? I'm not surprised. I've filed for divorce. My lawyer says I have grounds to claim adultery affected our property division, especially since he used marital assets to support the affair." We talked for another hour, comparing notes and evidence. By the time we parted ways, Janet had enough ammunition to ensure Reed's divorce would be as unpleasant as mine promised to be. That evening, I came home to find Vanessa packing suitcases in our bedroom. "Going somewhere?" I asked. "I'm staying with Beth until I can find a place. Probably for the best." She turned to face me, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before, genuine defeat mixed with grudging respect. "You're not who I thought you were," she said. "No, I'm exactly who I've always been. You just never bothered to pay attention." She zipped up her suitcase and headed for the door, then paused. "This isn't over, Alex." "You keep saying that, but from where I'm standing it looks pretty finished." After she left, I sat in my kitchen with a beer and my laptop, reading the comments on my social media posts. The response had been overwhelming, friends and co-workers expressing support, strangers sharing similar stories, and a few people who knew Vanessa confirming details about her character that I was only now learning. My phone buzzed with a text from Mason. "Dude, you're like a social media legend right now. Vanessa Gate is trending locally." I smiled and typed back, "Just getting started." Because I was. Vanessa thought she could destroy my reputation and my life with lies and manipulation. She was about to learn that the truth, properly presented, was a much more powerful weapon than fiction. The beautiful thing about the truth is that once it starts spreading, it takes on a life of its own. By the end of the week, Vanessa's carefully constructed facade had crumbled so completely that even her closest allies were distancing themselves from the wreckage. It started with her friend Beth, who had been Vanessa's most vocal supporter in the early days of our separation. Beth called me on Friday morning, sounding embarrassed and contrite. "Alex, I owe you an apology. I had no idea Vanessa had been lying to all of us." "What changed your mind?" "I talked to Kira. She played me the recording and showed me some text messages that prove Vanessa has been manipulating everyone. I feel like such an idiot." "You're not an idiot. Vanessa is very good at what she does." "Was. Past tense. Nobody's going to trust her again after this." Beth was right. The social media campaign had exposed not just Vanessa's affair and manipulation, but a pattern of behavior that went back years. Former friends and co-workers began sharing their own stories of how Vanessa had lied to them, used them, or thrown them under the bus when it suited her purposes. The most damaging revelation came from her first husband, Michael, who reached out to me through social media after seeing my posts. "I wish I'd had your evidence when I went through my divorce," he wrote. "Vanessa used the same playbook on me: affair, manipulation, false accusations. She took half of everything I'd worked for and convinced everyone I was the villain." With Michael's permission, I shared his story, along with court documents showing how Vanessa had used false domestic violence claims to gain advantage in their divorce proceedings. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a woman who'd made mistakes, but a predator who systematically destroyed the men in her life for financial gain. Meanwhile, I was busy implementing the financial protection strategy my lawyer had recommended. Oregon is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery can still affect property division if marital assets were used to support the affair. I had documentation showing thousands of dollars in charges to our joint accounts for hotels, restaurants, gifts, and trips that had nothing to do with legitimate marital expenses. I moved quickly to protect what I could. I transferred half of our joint savings to a separate account, as was my legal right. I canceled the credit cards that Vanessa had been using to fund her affair. I changed the passwords on all our shared accounts and began documenting every asset we owned. The house was the biggest complication. We'd bought it together, but I'd made the down payment from my inheritance when my father passed away 3 years earlier. My lawyer assured me that this gave me a strong claim to a larger share of the equity, especially with the evidence of adultery and financial misconduct, Patricia said during our Monday meeting. Oregon courts don't like it when one spouse uses marital assets to support an extramarital relationship. What about her claim that I'm abusive? That's not going anywhere. The fake harassment complaint actually works in your favor. It shows a pattern of false accusations and manipulation that undermines her credibility. The legal maneuvering was satisfying, but the real victory was watching Vanessa's reputation collapse in real time. Her professional network, built over years of careful cultivation, evaporated as word spread about her conduct. The consulting industry in Portland is smaller than people think, and trust is everything. Once you're known as someone who violates client confidentiality and fabricates harassment claims, finding new work becomes nearly impossible. I learned this from David Morrison, who called me the following week with an update. I thought you'd want to know that we've filed a civil suit against Ms. Rourke for breach of contract and misuse of company resources, he said. We're seeking damages for the harm to our reputation and the cost of the investigation. How much are we talking about? 6 figures, potentially. She billed us for nearly 40 hours of time that she spent with Mr. Parker on non-work activities. That's fraud, plain and simple. The financial pressure was mounting on Vanessa from multiple directions. She'd lost her job, faced a potential lawsuit, and was looking at a divorce where her misconduct would limit her settlement. But I wasn't done yet. The next phase of my campaign targeted her social standing in the community. Vanessa had always been obsessed with appearances, with being seen as successful and admired. She served on the board of a local charity, belonged to an exclusive fitness club, and was active in several professional organizations. I didn't have to do much to undermine her position in these groups. The truth did most of the work for me. When the charity board learned about her ethics violations and false accusations, they quietly asked for her resignation. The fitness club, faced with complaints from other members who'd seen the social media posts, suggested she might be more comfortable elsewhere. The professional organizations conducted their own reviews and reached similar conclusions. Within a month, Vanessa had gone from being a well-connected professional to a social pariah. The few friends who still spoke to her did so out of pity rather than respect. But the most satisfying moment came when I learned about Reed's situation through Janet Parker, who had become an unlikely ally in our parallel divorce proceedings. Reed's lawyer called my lawyer yesterday, she told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. Apparently he's broke. How is that possible? He was making good money. Turns out he's been living way beyond his means for years. The expensive car, the downtown condo, the lavish lifestyle. It was all financed with credit and loans. When he lost his job, the whole house of cards collapsed. Janet smiled grimly. He can't afford to fight the divorce, and he can't afford to pay spousal support. He's probably going to have to declare bankruptcy. What about Vanessa? That's the best part. She was counting on Reed to be her financial safety net after she left you. She thought she'd move in with him, let him support her while she rebuilt her career. Instead, she's stuck living with Beth and facing lawsuits she can't afford to fight. The irony was perfect. Vanessa had destroyed her marriage, her career, and her reputation in pursuit of what she thought would be a better life with a wealthy lover. Instead, she'd ended up with nothing while her lover faced financial ruin. But I still had one more card to play. The charity gala was an annual event that brought together Portland's professional and social elite. Vanessa had been looking forward to it for months, had bought an expensive dress, and had planned to attend with Reed as her date. It was supposed to be her coming out party as a successful single woman who'd upgraded from her boring husband to a dynamic executive. Instead, she found herself uninvited from an event where she'd previously been a board member. I, on the other hand, received a personal invitation from the new board chair, who had followed the drama on social media and wanted to show support for someone who'd handled a difficult situation with such dignity and class. The gala was held at the Portland Art Museum, a beautiful venue filled with the city's most influential people. I arrived alone, wearing my best suit and carrying a small recording device that I'd legally obtained permission to use. Vanessa was there despite being uninvited, having somehow convinced Beth to bring her as a +1. She looked beautiful, but desperate, like someone trying too hard to recapture something that was already lost. I waited until the silent auction portion of the evening, when people were mingling and the noise level was high enough to provide cover. Then I approached the podium and asked for the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something important to share with you." The room quieted as people turned to look at me. I could see Vanessa across the room, her face pale with horror as she realized what was about to happen. Many of you know me as Alex Rourke, and you may have heard rumors about my recent divorce. Tonight, I want to set the record straight. I played the recording of Vanessa admitting to her manipulation plan, her voice clear and damning in the elegant silence of the museum. Then I presented the evidence of her false accusations, her financial misconduct, and her systematic deception. I'm sharing this not out of spite, but because this community deserves to know the truth about someone who has been trusted with positions of responsibility and influence. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. People turned to stare at Vanessa, who stood frozen near the back of the room like a deer in headlights. Conversations stopped. The social humiliation was complete and public. Vanessa fled the gala within minutes, Beth trailing behind her with an expression of mortified embarrassment. I stayed for the rest of the evening, accepting condolences and support from people who now understood the full scope of what I'd endured. As I drove home that night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've destroyed everything I worked for. This isn't over." I smiled and typed back, "Yes, it is." But even as I sent the message, I knew Vanessa well enough to know she wouldn't go quietly into the night. Desperate people do desperate things, and I'd just made her very desperate indeed. I was right to be cautious. The final confrontation was coming, and it would be bigger and more dramatic than anything that had come before. The attack came on a Tuesday night in November, during one of those Pacific Northwest storms that make you grateful for solid roofs and good locks. I was in my home office, updating my divorce documentation, when the security system chimed with a perimeter alert. I'd installed the upgraded system a month earlier, after Vanessa's increasingly erratic behavior made it clear that desperate times were producing desperate measures. Motion sensors, cameras, automated alerts to my phone, the full package that my IT background allowed me to set up and monitor myself. The first camera showed two figures approaching my back door. Even in the rain and darkness, I recognized Vanessa's silhouette immediately. The second figure was larger, male, someone I didn't recognize but who moved with the confident swagger of someone accustomed to physical intimidation. I activated the recording system and called Mason. "Dude, it's almost midnight," he answered groggily. "Vanessa's here with some guy trying to break into my house. Can you come over and maybe bring that baseball bat you keep in your car?" "On my way. Don't do anything stupid until I get there." I watched through the cameras as Vanessa and her companion examined my back door, testing the locks and peering through windows. They were clearly looking for a way in, but they were also being cautious, probably hoping to avoid triggering any obvious alarms. They had no idea how thoroughly I'd prepared for this possibility. I activated the first countermeasure, exterior floodlights that turned night into day and would be visible to every neighbor within 3 blocks. Vanessa and her friend immediately retreated to the shadows, but the cameras tracked them with infrared capability. My phone rang. Vanessa. Turn off the lights, Alex. We just want to talk. Then talk from out there. I can hear you fine. Let me in. I have a right to retrieve my personal property. You retrieved your personal property when you moved out. Everything else belongs to both of us, and it stays here until the divorce is finalized. I know you have documents that belong to me, financial records, personal files. I need them back. The truth came out. She wasn't here for personal property. She was here for evidence, probably hoping to find and destroy documentation that would hurt her in the divorce proceedings or the civil lawsuit Morrison and Associates had filed against her. Sorry, Vanessa, those documents are in my lawyer's possession. Breaking into my house won't help you. I could hear her conferring with her companion in heated whispers. Then the line went dark. Through the cameras, I watched them circle the house, testing windows and looking for vulnerabilities. They found what they thought was an easy entry point, a basement window that appeared to have a broken latch. What they didn't know was that I'd deliberately made that window look vulnerable while rigging it with the kind of surprise that would make their breaking and entering attempt memorable for all the wrong reasons. Mason arrived as they were prying open the basement window. I met him at the front door, and we watched on my laptop as Vanessa's companion squeezed through the opening and dropped into my basement. He landed directly in the kiddie pool I'd positioned beneath the window, a kiddie pool filled with a mixture of water and biodegradable red dye that would stain everything it touched. The impact triggered a motion sensor that activated a series of air horns I'd mounted around the basement, creating a cacophony that could probably be heard in the next county. Jesus, Alex, Mason said, watching the man flail around in the red water while sirens wailed around him. You've turned your house into a Home Alone movie. The cameras are recording everything, breaking and entering, destruction of property, trespassing. This should be enough to get them both arrested. But Vanessa's companion was more determined than I'd expected. Despite being soaked in red dye and deafened by air horns, he made it to the basement stairs and started climbing toward the main floor. That's when I activated countermeasure number 2. The basement stairs were equipped with a sprinkler system I'd installed ostensibly for fire safety, but had modified for home defense. Instead of water, the sprinklers released a mixture of biodegradable soap and more red dye, turning the stairs into a slippery, colorful nightmare. The intruder made it 3 steps before losing his footing and sliding back down into the kiddie pool with a splash that sent red water cascading across my basement floor. This is insane, Mason said, but he was grinning. It's like watching a slapstick comedy. Outside, Vanessa was screaming at her companion to get up and keep trying. The cameras caught every word, including her admission that she was looking for the financial records and anything else that could hurt me in court. That's when I heard the sirens. I'd programmed the security system to automatically alert the police when certain sensors were triggered. The basement intrusion had crossed that threshold, and Portland's finest were now en route to investigate a breaking and entering in progress. Time for the grand finale, I told Mason. I activated the final countermeasure, exterior sprinklers that I'd positioned to cover every approach to the house. But these weren't ordinary sprinklers. They were loaded with the same red dye mixture, and they were programmed to track motion like automated sentries. Vanessa tried to run when the first sprinkler caught her, but there was nowhere to go. Every direction she turned, another sprinkler activated, soaking her in red dye until she looked like she'd been dipped in paint. Her companion finally made it out of the basement, but he emerged looking like a victim of a horror movie, covered in red from head to toe, slipping and sliding on the soapy mixture, and still dripping water from his unplanned swimming session. The police arrived to find both intruders standing in my front yard, completely covered in red dye, while I calmly provided them with video evidence of the entire break-in attempt. "Mr. Rourke," the lead officer said after reviewing the footage, "this is some of the clearest evidence of breaking and entering I've ever seen." "I'm in IT," I explained. "I believe in thorough documentation. Vanessa and her companion, who turned out to be a personal trainer named Derek that she'd been dating since Reed dumped her, were arrested on charges of burglary, trespassing, and destruction of property. The red dye would take weeks to completely fade, marking them as clearly as scarlet letters. But the legal consequences were just the beginning. The video footage went viral within hours of my posting it online. The image of Vanessa, covered in red dye and being led away in handcuffs while trying to maintain her dignity, became an instant meme. Red dye revenge trended nationally, and the story was picked up by news outlets across the country. The public humiliation was complete and devastating. Vanessa went from being a local scandal to being a national laughingstock, the poster child for what happens when manipulation and entitlement meet thorough preparation and modern technology. The divorce proceedings concluded swiftly after that. Vanessa's lawyer advised her to accept whatever settlement I offered, since fighting it would only draw more attention to her criminal behavior and civil liability. She ended up with a small fraction of what she'd originally demanded, barely enough to pay her legal fees and the restitution she owed for the break-in. Reed, meanwhile, had indeed declared bankruptcy and moved back in with his parents, his career and reputation destroyed beyond repair. The golden couple who had planned to build their happiness on the ruins of my life had instead destroyed themselves through their own greed and arrogance. The final moment came 6 months later, at the coffee shop where Kira and I had first discussed Vanessa's plan. I was meeting with Patricia to sign the last of the divorce papers when Vanessa walked in. She looked different, older, tired, wearing clothes that had clearly seen better days. The red dye had long since faded, but something essential had faded with it. The confidence, the manipulative charm, the sense of entitlement that had defined her, all of it was gone. She saw me and hesitated, then walked over to our table. "Alex," she said quietly. "Vanessa. I wanted to apologize. For everything." I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation that had once come so naturally to her, but all I saw was genuine defeat and what might have been actual remorse. "Apology noted," I said. "I know it doesn't change anything. I know I destroyed everything good in my life because I thought I deserved more than what I had." "You did." She nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, you were always too good for me. I just never wanted to admit it." After she left, Patricia looked at me with curiosity. "How do you feel?" she asked. I considered the question. How did I feel? Victorious? Satisfied? Vindicated? "Complete," I said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel complete." And I did. The man who had been underestimated, manipulated, and betrayed had not only survived, but had systematically dismantled the conspiracy against him using nothing but intelligence, preparation, and an unshakable commitment to the truth. Vanessa had thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She'd been wrong about that, just as she'd been wrong about everything else. I gathered my papers, shook Patricia's hand, and walked out into the Portland sunshine, ready to begin the rest of my life as a man who had learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting ahead. The game was over, and I had won completely.